started now. Thank you so much for being here. Make your way to a seat when you get a chance. And welcome to Tipping the Scales for Climate, Jobs, and Justice, Divestment, and Public Banking. Thank you so much for making time to be here on this day and on this land, inhabited by and cared for by the Ramaytush Ohlone and other indigenous tribes for so many thousands of years and continuing to this day. Appreciations to all the old friends and divestment and public banking activists who are here today. Can I see a show of hands if you can consider yourself one of those? So take a look around. There are a lot of activists here today, a lot of old friends as well. And I'm super happy to see all the new faces. Can you raise your hand if you consider yourself a new face to this issue? Or a new face to this area? I see Cynthia. It's like, yeah. Great. That gives me a lot of hope. That shows the appeal of our awesome speakers that you got a preview of just now, and the twin topics of divestment and public banking. So without further ado, our first speaker is Jody Evans. She's the co-founder and director of Code Pink. She works tirelessly to end the war economy and grow local peace economies, whether in the boardroom or war zones, legislative offices or neighborhood streets. Jody is deeply engaged in radical activism to end war and the war machine. A producer of many documentary films, she is currently writing a book about divesting from the unjust and extractive war economy and building a just, sustainable peace economy. Can you help me welcome Jody Evans?
Of our labor is privately accumulated. I mean, it should be socially accumulated to the needs of the people, and it's not.
Yes.
And so I just want to say that as we start this day, that divest and public banking are not only ways to change what we're living inside of, but they're ways to build power and educate. So that what we're here about is, I mean, we say we're doing a Divest from War campaign because the White House is Teflon and Congress is dysfunctional. And so I'm on the board member at Rainforest Action Network for 20 years, and back to corporate campaigning is so much easier because corporations actually, you could pull up their change and they have something they can actually lose. And the Divest from Fossil Fuels campaign is now $6 trillion. And when you go to Wall Street, they'll tell you how much it has changed their lives and changed Wall Street. So, as somebody who's been 16 years trying to end war, and we had a campaign for 3 years to try to stop Saudi Arabia from selling weapons to Yemen. And we got 4 Republican senators, finally, that said, okay, this is wrong. And so we let it go to vote, and guess what? We lost. Why? Because 5, I won't use the words, but Democrats voted yes. And what happened? Those Democrats had taken money, a lot of money, from weapons companies. So I'm totally off script and off my divestment. But I just felt we should contextualize this. So another way capital is on strike is all that money's in Wall Street. It's a fault, it's fake, it's a lie, it's a pyramid scheme, but they just put it in there and pretend they're doing something. The crime is in Wall Street. I just went and spoke to a bunch of women in Wall Street, 400 of them, and asked them to all raise their hand if they were feminists. Most everyone raised their hand. I said, how do you be a feminist and work in Wall Street? Last time I checked, it was about equality. And there's nothing driving inequality more than Wall Street. And so that's the place on strike. What are they doing? holding capital away from the needs of the people. Just it's sucked in there. Not good. Another way to make people present to the war economy and what's happening. So, why divest? I don't need to talk to you about why divest, but I want to talk to you about why a campaign around divestment. You know, we've been trying to end wars for a very long time. It's out there. It doesn't touch us. Let me tell you, I deal with it every day. I have, 5 women refugees that we've rescued at Kupink from Afghanistan. And today they did a live video on our Facebook page about the hypocrisy of the United States coming into Afghanistan saying we're going to save the women and talking about what's happened to the women. And each of them, how many members of their family and their friends they lose. Samira, who works on the Divest campaign, by the way, at Kupink, she came to us because she was going to law school in Kabul, and that the Taliban came in and killed 75 people, and she was running for her life. She could only remember dark hallways and crawling her way out when she came to us. And her professor from Stanford, by the way, was killed because Stanford was helping the university in Kabul. And then her sister was in another bombing, and guess 2 days ago, her best friend died in a bombing, who was a fantastic journalist in Kabul. So these young women talk about war, but do you think anybody's listening? Because, let's just talk about immigration. Remember we were saving 11 million people, and then we were saving students, and now we're saving children. They just keep narrowing our vision away from the biggest pictures that we need to be dealing with, like where your money goes, where your taxes go, that like 60% of your tax dollars go to war. And then not only to war, but weapon systems get 35% of that. In the last, that means that you're paying taxes for the rich to get richer. Do you get that? Like, it just goes here, it gets into a weapons company, and it goes out and makes the rich richer, while, by the way, bombing children in buses in Yemen and killing, in the last month, 50 kids in buses in Yemen? What's happening in Yemen, I can't even go there because it's too hard. The way they sell this, as things are sold in Wall Street, is job creation. But the jobs we need, the carrying peace economy jobs we need, we could get a lot more of those out of the same amount of money without destroying the planet and people. So, why do we let Congress get away with these lies? No different than why do we let our kids go to school and be saddled with $100,000 loans? It's this, I call it the culture of the war economy, because we allow violence. That's a violence to a child at 22. That's a violence to the whole world that gets sold because somebody gets a job. Nobody says, but wait a sec, what does that job do? And aren't there better jobs? And can't they make us healthier and better people and more alive? So, yes, remember when we started Kupink, who lies, who dies, who pays, who profits? Well, here's one of our poster children of profiting. This is Larry Fink of BlackRock, who's a Fink. He goes around and does speeches, by the way, on being a socially responsible company, while he's invested in fossil fuels, in guns, in weapons companies, and in the people who are separating families at the border. But he is sold as the champion of socially responsible investing, while he has the most assets of any other company in the world. So, not only just what does he invest in, but he's just the, octopus of Wall Street. Well, Nancy Mancias, a Bay Area Kupinker, is running this campaign. We are outside of his offices every week, which he does not like. I do me work a lot, and I watch between when I make it a public event and a private event. There's always 17 security taking care of me. The last time I didn't let anybody know I was coming, I made it all the way to the second floor, which freaked everyone out. Like, they're just so afraid. We disrupted their shareholder meeting, which Trump, by the way, attended. Yeah. So wait till I get to the better part of the story. So here in the Bay Area, the vigil that happens every Wednesday night, the Code Pink Vigil, they manage to get to Black Rock often. But we need to keep bugging him. I have brought postcards, they're over there. Everyone should grab one and send one. But there's also a letter that I want you to sign. So the International Refugee Committee has made Larry Fink their humanitarian of the year. Right. What makes refugees? Weapons, right? So the hypocrisy, the insanity of this even affects, like, I go to the IRC offices and the staffs are appalled. The person running the Pasadena office, we've gone to see him, and he's, trying to get them to change their mind, but Mr. Fink wrote a big check to IRC. But as we know, as nonviolent activists, whenever you start to move forward on something, you get to expose even more violence. And so just look at what this campaign has done. It's led us to him, and then it's led us to what's happening in the IRC. So we start to look inside the IRC, it's all about Wall Street. It's not about refugees, it's all about Wall Street and who's getting the business. And in the meantime, what does it look like to be a refugee is horrific. I mean, I was just in Lebanon. I went to work with the Syrian refugees at the border. How they are treated is so beautiful compared to how we treat them, I can't even tell you. I mean, putting people in tents in the middle of the desert or putting them in homes inside of beautiful cities, very different experience. But I do have letters to the head of IRC I'd love for you to sign and mail for me, because we need to keep telling that IRC that this is not okay, that we are, their slip is showing that this is not how you take care of refugees, and we just can't allow it. So let's talk about starting a campaign in your own community. The idea is there are so many places to educate where people don't understand that they're invested in the war economy. And they don't understand that they're invested in weapons. Let me start with just, really active code pinkers. Can I out you, Cynthia? Like, Cynthia is invested in weapons. Somebody's in her retirement plan.
Nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons.
And fossil fuels.
Yeah.
As well.
So it gets to be an intimate conversation with someone, instead of about the Syria war over there or Yemen kids over here, or that tend to overwhelm. It becomes a lever people can actually pull and affect, even though they're going to feel, as always, overwhelmed. Change is hard, and people will, talk back. Remember, we got everybody out of banks, we can get everybody out of bad money. And it's a little bit of a handhold, but it's more than that. It's an education opportunity about the world we live in, about the culture we live inside of. And I mean, universities, religious communities, local philanthropy, all about like peace, economies, and caring for each other, caring and sharing, that are in war and violence, and investing in that and making a killing on killing. These are really easy stories to tell. That it's very hard for the person on the other side of the table to tell you, yes, I really want to be invested in weapons and war and violence. It's hard for them. You kind of have a heads up when you walk in the door. So I just want to say our congressional campaign was started by Congresswoman Barbara Lee, when I told her, we have this divestment campaign going on, and she goes, you have to go after Congress. I'm the first one. I pledged to not take any money, so she's the one that, we didn't even have that down, but she added that. Because she's right, and we knew the experience of it, and we hadn't even thought about it. But, going after a member of Congress, I mean, I don't know who your member is here, if it's...
On an issue?
On an issue. She's not pledged to divest yet. Good place to go, she should. She knows better. So that's an easy start. I say take the easy starts. get it under your belt, so that the next one you share your victory and attract more people to the next party. But locally, there's layers and layers and layers of things to do locally. I mean, one right now is Nancy Mencius. You can write to Nancy and say what IRC donors are in my zip code area, and go and just deliver the letters to them, because that's shocking. When it's some corporation that's been giving to the IRC, and you say to them, look, this person who is invested in weapons of war is being honored as a humanitarian, they don't know what to do. It makes them really uncomfortable, and the good ones go to act. So we have a bunch of tools to help you. We have a team. So if you decide to target someplace that you want to be working on, Rita at codepink.org is there to help you. We have tools on the website. We have city resolution tools. We have tools to go to universities. We now have the weaponsfreefunds.org site that we did with As You Sow. We're constantly creating tools. We love your questions. What gets in the way, so we can create more paths of freedom through. We have all kinds if you want to sign up on the Divest campaign, you can just go to codepink.org/divest and sign up, and we'll send you things like where they're really easy things to do so that you can get engaged and be connected to everyone that's doing things across the country. So do I have like a raise of hand of everybody who wants to divest in this room? Okay, we're here to help. And then who wants to be engaged and do something locally? Fantastic. So Cynthia's got a sign-up form. I thank you for being here. I thank you, Mel, for having this. And I'll move out of the way.
We have another hand for Jody Evans, coming all the way from SoCal to be at the march yesterday and at GCAS this week. So our next speaker is Geraldine Moran. She's a member of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Palo Alto and co-chair of the Green Sanctuary Committee. She's been at UU for over 25 years in a variety of locations, advocating for environmental sustainability. Originally trained as a wildlife biologist, she bends towards the welfare of wild creatures, but her advocacy is for sustainable living for all. Geraldine, please join us.
Hi everybody, I'm Geraldine, and I'm really glad to be here today. I'm just here to offer you for a few minutes the perspective of divestment from the world of faith. I come to you this afternoon from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Palo Alto. Let me see if I can work Melanie's computer here. Unitarian Universalism is one faith among many, but what I'd like to talk about briefly is I want you to consider right now, for a moment, from a faith perspective, that this climate crisis we've entered, first and foremost, is a moral issue, and that's what I'm wanting to convey to you in this moment. It's an argument that's shared by just about all the major religions of the world. This is, at the in Unitarian Universalism, we go by 7 principles, and I just share that with you. I would like to highlight the 7th principle, which is the respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part, and this fight for climate change mitigation. Divestment specifically speaks to that principle. Nathaniel Rich, he wrote a long report entitled "Losing Earth." I'm sorry. Losing Earth, the decade we almost stopped climate change. And he argues that we're pretty much doomed, and at this point that we've missed our chance to right the wrong, and devastation is pretty much inevitable. But I would like to offer that there's many leaders of faith communities, they're taking a different stand, and I'll offer one. The Reverend Sawtell, he insists that we can make moral choices and that we can be motivated by compassion and justice for future generations. And I'd like to include the thought that that means us humans, but all forms of life on our planet. Anyway, I want to add to this the many others that say that even though climate change poses huge risks financially, there's huge opportunities are available for faith communities to stay aligned with their moral compass, yet succeed financially for the long term. And diversity is key here. So, just really briefly, I just want to offer how things happen at the Unitarian Universalist Church here in Palo Alto in reference to divestment. A conversation started a while back in 2011 among a few congregants talking about divestment, but the worry was it's too complicated. It's a process we don't know how to deal with. So in 2013, our congregation, I call, for short, the Unitarian Universalist Church in Palo Alto, we call it UUCPA. Unitarian Universalist is really an awkward name, but we committed to divest all of our capital funds after going through the board and having a vote church-wide. So the following year, the National UU Assembly, I'll call that UUA, established a resolution to divest its portfolio from of their capital funds. So that was a good thing. Also that year, UUCPA, the investment committee, recommended moving most of our capital funds to the UUA National Endowment Fund. The goal there was, well, that sounds like it'd be more efficient, more effective. Sorry, Gail. I like you so much, I want you to come up here. I'm not sure why. So, that was the same year, and that was also I think our local church in Palo Alto, we really thought that would be a good strategy to join our funds with the national treasurer's efforts to divest, because we thought that would be a good route to go. But I bring that up because in the following couple of years, it really didn't go that way. There's something called commingled funds and something called direct investment. And what really transpired as we kept track of the national activity in this category is the commingled funds, which the national level assured us that they have no control over, which is not necessarily the case, and then also the directly invested funds. Actually, the percentage of fossil fuel investment actually got a little worse than better, which was obviously a problem. So our committee wrote letters and continued to keep track, and we kept pressing on them. Last year, at the end of last year, the UUA finally became involved with a new initiative. It's called the Climate 100 Initiative, which it brings together a lot of investors. I think there's 225 of them, but that it represents $26.3 trillion in assets that's going under the management of that group. So our committee and our church again sent letters and wrote letters to the UUA on this topic to keep them moving to align their values in the resolution that they created with their actual actions. I feel like things are slowly moving in the right direction. My point to you now, right in this moment, is we here at the UUCPA Church are a small entity in the bigger picture, but I feel we've had an influence at the national level of what our faith group is actually doing in this divestment world. And I encourage you to consider in your own faith community that you really can move the needle, even if you're just a small piece. Just to mention another group quickly, locally there's a group called Peninsula Interfaith Climate Action, and we talk quite a bit and work quite a bit amongst each other. There's probably 8 or 9 faiths represented, local houses of worship. We talk about divestment, and it's another local group that I feel has potential to make a change in this department. In closing, I want to emphasize that the backbone of major justice movements has always been faith and the faith community. And I would be happy to share our most recent letter to the National Association with you as a sample of our communications. But thank you for having me today.
Can we get another hand for Jeremy? Thank you. So our next speaker is Gail McLaughlin. She has served as a city council member and a 2-term mayor of Richmond, California, where she helped to advance the city's progressive transformation, reducing crime, setting up a $15 per hour minimum wage, challenging the influence of Chevron Corporation, which operates a refinery in Richmond. She was an independent candidate for Lieutenant Governor of California in 2018. Woohoo! And is a co-founder of Richmond Progressive Alliance and the founder of the California Progressive Alliance. Please join me in welcoming Gail.
Okay, now it's on. All right. Well, thank you. Yes? Okay. What's that? Oh.
It just disappeared.
Oh, maybe it's just.
Yeah, there
Oh,
it is.
here you go. Great. Got it. All right. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mel, for really holding this and getting us all together. And thank you, everyone, for being here. It was great to hear from both Jody and Sherilyn, I remember. And it's great to be among great activists who understand the challenges we have in our world, in our cities, in our state, in our country. And so what I'm going to speak about today is some of the work we've done in Richmond, in particular in terms of divesting from fossil fuels. And Richmond is really a case study because we've done some remarkable work. We've transformed the city in so many ways. And because we have this big giant oil refinery, the Chevron oil refinery, it ties right in with this divestment. And the work and the challenges and the problems we've had with Chevron are the reason why we have to divest. It's the reason we have to, really put these fossil fuel companies on notice that, you know, they can't keep doing this to our communities and to our planet. So, let me see here. Okay, so this is a global crusade, but it's a local struggle. I mean, Geraldine talked about how, you know, every local area, including the faith community, every various entity can do our part, and that is how it works. Saving the planet from climate change is truly an epic battle, and it is global in scope. And worldwide, these oil companies hurt communities on the ground, and they destroy the atmosphere above. So it hurts us in our local communities, as well as hurting the planet as a whole. Oops, going this way. So first, a little background on Richmond. So the demographics of my community is, first of all, Richmond, in case people don't know, is right across the bay from San Francisco. We're a majority people of color community. Our population is really now is closer to 110,000. This was came from a couple years back. The poverty level is 18.5%, meaning, you know, 18.5% of our population lives under the poverty level. The makeup of the demographics is we have 40% of our community Latino, we have 27% African Americans, 13% Asian, and about 17% white. So in many ways we consider Richmond ground zero. You know, the battles we fought have extreme and major importance. We're home to this 116-year-old Chevron oil refinery, which is California's single largest greenhouse polluter. So here's some other information about the Chevron Richmond refinery. In addition to it being the single largest greenhouse gas polluter in California, it releases millions of tons of pollution each year, including carbon dioxide, methane, and many other co-pollutants that heavily impact our community. You know, the greenhouse gas emissions come out, you know, constantly, but other co-pollutants come out with it. And these, you know, really harm our community. It produces 40% of all the greenhouse gases in the Bay Area. So this one refinery in Richmond, the largest refinery in California, produces 40% of all the greenhouse gases in the Bay Area and 80% of Richmond's pollution. Most cities say the traffic that they have is the highest polluter, you know, the cars and such, and they do pollute without a doubt, and you know, they keep Chevron in business. But the refinery itself produces 80% of the pollution in Richmond. And what is Chevron's bottom line? What keeps them going? What drives them? Well, the refinery in Richmond is responsible for 10% of Chevron's worldwide sales and profits. It averages $25 billion in sales and $2.5 billion in profits per year. So it's a very profitable refinery. And 94% of their $40 billion a year capital budget goes to more oil and gas exploration. And only 3% goes to making their refinery and chemical plants, there's also a chemical plant in Richmond, as safe and low emission as they should be. So we know that big oil is formidable, but they are not invincible. And Richmond has shown this. After decades of Chevron domination, ordinary people, like all of us, organized and stood up to the oil giant. And we have won really important victories against all odds. So let me share some of these victories. So I was the first corporate-free council member elected to the Richmond City Council in 2004. And so in 2005, what we did was we removed Chevron's self-inspection protocols. Chevron used to be able to inspect their own refinery, believe it or not. Wow. I mean, prior to the movement we formed in Richmond, Chevron had dominated the city and the city council. And they let, you know, them pretty much do what they want. And so they inspected their own refinery rather than having the planning department go and making sure it was up to code, etc. So we changed that. We also stopped Chevron's initial refinery expansion plan in court in 2009. I was mayor at that point. It was passed, this bad project was passed by the majority. As mayor, I only had one vote. I was in the minority voting against the expansion plan. Well, the environmental groups, after the city council passed it, the environmental groups took Chevron and the city to court, and the environmental groups won, yay. And so they stopped the project. So, you know, all our work to really push back on Chevron, and we had huge mobilizations, and I was proud to be part of that effort and champion it as mayor. In 2008, we defeated Chevron at the ballot box with a citizens' initiative to tax large manufacturers, which would have predominantly impacted Chevron. It was called Measure T. It forced Chevron to settle with $114 million in additional taxes for Chevron. So there was a battle, you know, with another court case. Chevron took the citizens of Richmond to court, saying that our ballot measure wasn't legal, and the courts ruled in Chevron's favor at that point. But we were going to put another ballot measure on right away to keep the momentum going. The people were on our side. But Chevron came to the negotiating table, settled with us for $114 million in additional taxes. That was a victory for the people of Richmond. And then we sued Chevron for the accumulated damage to the community caused by Chevron's long history of environmental abuse and unsafe operations, including and especially the August 2012 fire, which some of you might know about. Toxic plume went across the city and, you know, into other cities. Chevron was convicted of willful criminal neglect for that fire. So we sued them, first time in Richmond's history. Okay, and another victory, we triumphed over Chevron's millions in the electoral field. Today we have 5 city council seats out of 7 total filled with corporate free council members. So that's a super majority. So that's because we have an alliance, the Richmond Progressive Alliance, and that's our little logo up in the right corner there, that runs corporate free council members and that builds a local movement. And so our local movement continues to work on transforming Richmond today. So we know Chevron is an extremely bad actor, but there are other bad actors as well. You know, BP, Shell, 76, Exxon. There's coal manufacturers and coal companies and Petcoke and so many other fossil fuel companies that are bad actors. So what to do? Well, hit them in the pocketbook. That gets their attention. We know that. Get finance out of fossil fuels. That is key, and that's what divestment is all about. The whole focus, the whole purpose is to phase out fossil fuels and to phase in renewable energy and to provide energy access to people, you know. That's something we did in Richmond by joining up with a community choice energy group, so now our residents get cleaner, greener, and cheaper sources of energy. So we know we can fight them on many fronts. So I just want to give you a little history of Richmond's divestment issue or divestment actions. Way back, a few decades back, Richmond did pass a divestment resolution against apartheid in South Africa. So that's part of our history, along with many other cities and schools, etc. And that made a big difference. And so we always use that when we talk about, you know, future divestment, like from fossil fuels and from war, as Jody talked about. So very important. And it's all tied in, because when you divest from fossil fuels, then the whole idea of fighting wars for oil, you know, is impacted as well. So all this ties in together. So we divested from fossil fuels in Richmond in 2013. And I have some copies of the resolution at that table over there that shows, you know, gives you some detail, gives actually the whole resolution and how, you know, what we put into it and what we were resolving as a result of it. And I'll share with you on the next slide some of the key points of that resolution. But I also want to say that Richmond just recently, gosh, maybe 6 months ago or less, maybe a few months ago, passed an ordinance. What it did was we're a sanctuary city, and it revised our sanctuary city ordinance to say that Richmond will no longer contract with ICE data vendors. So, that's another movement for divestment. Have cities not invest or have business with those vendors that share their data with ICE. So we definitely keep moving forward in the divestment world. So here's what the 2013 divestment resolution that Richmond passed did in terms of its main issues. We vowed not to invest in fossil fuel companies and committed to not invest directly or indirectly in such companies in the future. That's important. You have to not just do it now, but make sure it goes forward into the future. And we sent a letter to CalPERS and PARS, these are two big public pension boards, urging them to review their investment portfolio and ensure that none of their investments or commingled assets include holdings in fossil fuel, public equities, or corporate bonds, and to do it within 5 years. We had enough research done to say that this could be done within 5 years and moving into a different type of investment, such as renewable energy. And so the other thing the resolution says is we vow to continue Richmond's clean energy policies and urge CalPERS and PARS to invest in opportunities for clean energy and renewable energy with an emphasis on investments that support local jobs. We want to keep that effort going to say that, yes, investing in a socially responsible way in renewable energy is not only good for the planet, but it's good for jobs, for our communities. I mean, lots of renewable energy companies provide huge numbers of jobs for our people. So now, as much as the whole divestment from fossil fuels and divestment from war, has a connection, there's also a connection with Wall Street, of course. And here is something that I recently found, that banks increased their extreme fossil fuel financing in 2017. So at a time when we want the investments in fossil fuels to go down for the survival of the planet, Wall Street is increasing their financing in the fossil fuel industry. So we know, lots more work to do. This on the right, the picture on the right is the picture of Bernie Sanders when he spoke, and this is the Richmond Auditorium when he spoke in Richmond in 2014. Before he started his campaign, he was just thinking about it at the time. He gave a great talk. He supported myself and two other progressive candidates, endorsed us for local office. And he said something that he said many times in the future and in the past, prior to this as well. Since the Wall Street crash, 95% of all new income created in America since 2008 has gone to the top 1%. Now that goes to show you that, this wealth inequality is just growing, and it's a major, major problem for us all. I mean, California is the 5th largest economy in the world, but we're also we have the highest rate of poverty in the nation. So our wealth inequality in California is enormous. Now this also ties into public banks, right? If private banks are investing in fossil fuels, it's another reason. We know that they're doing all kinds of harm in other ways as well, taking all our money and interest, etc. But it certainly is another reason to push the public bank idea. Public banks, of course, go by the whole concept of this is our money, cities, state. People pay taxes and you put your money into your city government or state government. And where does it go? It goes into the private banks that your city is operating with, or your state is operating with. If we had a public bank, that tax money would go into a public bank whose purpose is to serve the common good. So I just want to say Oakland, Berkeley, and Richmond financed a feasibility study on a regional public bank. I think that's pretty soon going to come forward. LA also has a ballot measure for a public bank in LA, and if that passes, it'll give impetus for more public banks. So to sum up, the way we beat fossil fuel companies in Wall Street is by hitting them in the pocketbook and mobilizing against their destructive impact on our planet and our communities. And the way we do this is through building alliances and coalitions. Here's some Richmond examples: standing up to Wall Street, standing up to Chevron, standing against dirty crude. Richmond IDs for all in Richmond was a mobilization to give everyone an ID, even those undocumented immigrants, so they could have a bank account and services. Other mobilizations. Here's another mobilization during an election. Our election is not for sale, Chevron. You know, your millions of dollars are not going to beat out the people of Richmond. So my last slide here, I have one more just with my contact info, but this one is just to let you know. Many of you know I ran my campaign for as an independent for Lieutenant Governor. Didn't make the top 2, but we made such a great splash with organizing so many groups. You know, more than any statewide candidate. We had 100 progressive groups endorsing the campaign. And so now we want to keep that organizing effort going, and the California Progressive Alliance is a group I'm organizing, or is part of the organizing effort with. It's a corporate free network coming together regardless of party or no party. And when we fight and strategize for the people and the people's planet, we win. The choice is ours: the danger that fossil fuel companies present, or health and safety for our children and future generations. So thank you very much. Here's my contact information. At my table over there, please, if you were raising money for the California Progressive Alliance, here's a book I wrote on Richmond called Winning Richmond: How a Progressive Alliance Won City Hall for $15 or more. All the money goes to the California Progressive Alliance. So I hope you'll stop by and perhaps donate to get a free book. So thank you very much, and let's keep up the great work.
He is an environmental engineer and program director of Greenbelt Alliance, a Bay Area environmental organization. He is also a candidate for public office at the Mid-Peninsula Water District serving Belmont and San Carlos. In 2010, is that right? In 2010, Brian was elected to public office as a director of the Santa Clara Valley Water District, where he served as vice chair and led the Water District's Climate Divestment Initiative. Please welcome Brian.
Thanks, Melanie. Let's see, up and down, there we go. Great. So hello everybody. Melanie asked me to come here and to give you your second case study, and since Gail did such a great job, I'm going to just fill in the corners a little bit about our experience at Santa Clara Valley Water District, and I'll be brief. Also, I just thought it was kind of interesting. Gail asked me to send a headshot when I was coming here, and since we're all a bunch of environmentalists, I thought I'd send one where I'm literally hugging a tree. So that's 180 feet up a redwood tree, by the way. That was a birthday present for my wife. So anyway, yeah, I was on the board of Santa Clara Valley Water District, and by our count, we were the third government agency to divest back in 2013, and so we got some good publicity about that when it happened. And at the same time, you kind of think, well, water agencies, what could be more boring than a water agency? But what I thought might be interesting and might be interesting thing to expand upon what Gail was saying was our period of time it took us to divest was 2 months. So that is from the time when I first put a memo in front of my colleagues saying, maybe we should divest, to when they said, we are divesting. So I think that might be helpful to think about how it could be done in other circumstances. And part of it, I think, comes down to what Santa Clara Valley Water District and what many other water agencies do. Obviously, it's water. When you think about water and you think about climate, especially here in California, when we've had huge droughts and now we're suffering yet again from fires. And we don't know what this next winter water season is going to be like. Pretty easy to fall back into another drought. That climate is very relevant to water functions and governmental water operations. Santa Clara Valley Water District does water supply for Santa Clara County, for the 2 million people here in Santa Clara County. It provides flood protection, and then it does watershed protection and watershed restoration. And all three of those things are greatly adversely affected by climate change. And the only argument I really had to make was to my colleagues and to the rest of the staff at the Water District was, if we're so greatly harmed as we could clearly understand about climate change, why would we finance climate change? And that's basically all that was needed to make it happen. I've submitted my first resolution saying, let's think about this in June of 2013. And what got me started on that was seeing some articles about Bill McKibben and 350.org, and then I attended a webinar. And one of the things they talked about in the webinar was that fossil fuel companies' valuations are based in part about how much fossil fuels they own. And the proven reserves of fossil fuels far exceeds the amount that we could safely put in the atmosphere, and even far exceeds the amount that governments have committed would be the maximum that would happen, something around 600% more. So in other words, these companies are heavily overvalued. They cannot sell everything that their value is based on. If they do, we're all doomed. It's not going to get to that point. So there's also financial reason to divest. And finally, what was also very important, and Gail, I'd be interested to hear from you afterwards, but it was very important among our staff and internally, was that there's a very objective system for doing this. That there are nonprofit organizations that just track fossil fuel companies and say, this is a fossil fuel company, this is not. Here's how you can make sure that your investments stay out of it. And that was important for our financial people, as they said, we don't want to be subjective about this, we don't want to make decisions ourselves, we just want to have something very clear for us. So doing that, I brought my resolution, and I encountered no opposition, either in staff or among my 6 other board members, and we passed it unanimously, 7-0, in August after bringing the resolution in June. The other thing I would note is that this brought a lot of interest to our not very well-known agency, and 350.org mobilized their people, as did a bunch of others, and we got more public comments on that one item than anything else that I had seen at the water districts in the 4 years that I was there. So it was a good example of how things worked out really well. I think the other thing I'll add on that subject is, to make something happen, you needed a champion. And I'm going to be egotistically saying that I was a champion on there. And that's basically what you need at any other government agency you're going to try or any other institution for that matter, that you're going to try and find somebody who's really going to take it on and push it. And I was very, very lucky in that nobody was pushing back against me within the government agency. We got a few snarky letters from some folks that didn't like it, but there was not a strong pushback internally. So if you're not an elected official yourself, maybe it's time for you to become an elected official. But short of that, just go around and start talking to your elected officials and find someone who will be inspired by what you're talking about and help that person be the champion, and then you can make it happen. So that was the basic things I think that helped fill out what Gail was talking about. And I'm happy to move on to the next speaker.
That was inspirational, huh? Are people motivated to go find a champion? Because I am motivated. Our next speaker is Sylvia Chi. Sylvia is an attorney and member of the Friends of the Public Bank of Oakland and Defenders of Mother Earth Hui Ching. an Indigenous-led, Oakland-based, grassroots no-DAPO coalition. She also chairs the legislative working group of the California Banking Alliance. Please help me welcome Sylvia Chee.
Hey everybody, thanks for being here. So what could be more boring than water districts? It's perhaps banking for some of us. So I'm an attorney, but I am not a finance attorney, so I don't have a lot of special knowledge about this. I'm learning this along with you guys. So I'm here, I'm going to try to talk about public banking and municipal divestment in ways that hopefully lay people can understand. And hopefully it'll be accurate. Oh, that shouldn't be there. Okay, so the overview here is what is a public bank? It's a bank that is owned by a government entity. That could be a state, a city, or a group of cities, or a country, or maybe even like a school district or whatever you can imagine. And public banks might be the only viable way for large cities to stop banking with Wall Street banks that finance certain industries or projects like fossil fuels, private prisons, and violations of indigenous sovereignty. And even more importantly is that they can transform the economy by leveraging public assets, the city deposits that are in the bank, to fund investments that benefit the community. And some examples of that are affordable housing, clean energy, and climate-resilient infrastructure. So to break that down a little bit more, cities and counties that are seeking to divest from certain companies or industries have no real alternatives to the Wall Street banks that finance them. Wall Street banks aren't accountable to the public, only to their shareholders, who aren't incentivized to invest in local communities. Public banks will be accountable to the people and legally required to serve the public interest. And profits from public banks will be returned to the public instead of to private shareholders. So, public banks will serve the public interest and strengthen communities by putting the people in control of their taxpayer dollars. So, why divest from banks? We've already heard about divesting from specific industries like fossil fuel companies. This is basically a step farther because banks finance the fossil fuel companies. And so I wanted to talk about the Dakota Access Pipeline because that's what brought me to this movement. There's probably everybody here knows at least a little bit about the Dakota Access Pipeline. It's this huge pipeline that's going across the country. There's a lot of really good information about it, actually, at least displayed on the side here. And as an environmentalist, I think we can all see very easily what the problem is with the Dakota Access Pipeline in terms of fossil fuels and climate change. But I also wanted to highlight the importance of solidarity with Indigenous people who are affected by it, as well as all the other fossil fuel projects that affect them. Because I think as settlers, most of us find it easy to ignore that because you think, oh, that's like a really small percentage of people. You might kind of dismiss it, but I think it's really important to think about how it really affects the Indigenous people whose land we're all living on. So to put it into kind of historical context, there's this tradition of the United States of permitting extraction without the consent of Indigenous people. And there's this United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which requires consent. It requires governments and companies to get meaningful consent from Indigenous communities. The United States is one of the few countries that hasn't ratified that, of course, but that's just a clear violation. But at the same time, we also need to recognize that there's a historical tradition of Indigenous-led environmental movements, and that is what happened at Standing Rock. The huge protests that we saw were led by Indigenous people, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, and we need to recognize that. So yeah, like I was saying, we need to recognize the leadership of the Standing Rock Sioux and the other indigenous activists that were there and that are sounding the alarm. And we also have to recognize that we're not in the same boat in terms of the indigenous peoples are the frontline communities for climate change. They're already being affected by some of the worst consequences of climate change before people in the developed world are. And we need to support their sovereignty and self-determination. I think that's just a matter of human rights. And climate justice requires equity for indigenous people. Okay, so this is a little infographic I tried to make about how banks fund projects like DAPL because it's kind of confusing. It's not very direct. It looks like some of my graphics got messed up, but so basically on the top left, this is an oversimplification, obviously, but the city puts its deposits, let's say $100, just to keep it simple, into the bank. And then banks practice fractional reserve banking, which means they only need to keep a fraction of that deposit in their reserves. And then they can loan the rest out. They can leverage that deposit and turn it into an investment in something else that they want. So in this example, we're saying they keep $10 in the bank, they take $90 and give it to DAPL, or give it in the form of a loan, perhaps, to private prisons. And then the bank or that industry will pay the bank back in terms of fees and interest, and the bank keeps making profit, and then the city doesn't get any of that money back in any real way. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Oakland banks, because that's where I'm from. It's probably analogous to your city. Oakland has an annual budget of $1.4 billion, and the cash accounts are about $700 million. So a lot of the investments are tied up in these types of investment products on the right, and those are restricted in part by state law about what the prudent investor standard is, and that has requirements about like what types of investment instruments cities and counties can invest in. So like they're buying a lot of like notes that are issued by government agencies. They're not buying directly in like Chevron, for example. And then Oakland also has an investment policy that says that the city cannot invest in nuclear weapons, fossil fuels, companies that make firearms, and tobacco companies. So that all applies just to their investments. It doesn't apply to like if they contract with a bank that invests in those things. And then when you talk about banking for a city, it's actually like pretty easy for an individual or nonprofit or small business to divest from a Wall Street bank. There's a lot of community banks you can move your money to, or credit unions. But cities have different needs that we have found are not met by non-Wall Street banks. And we've talked to some of the mission-driven banks like Beneficial and New Resource Bank, and they don't have the capacity to provide these services to at least the bigger cities. Maybe the smaller cities they can do. But so the way it works in Oakland is they have all that money in the investment accounts. They have a bunch of other accounts too, they have accounts for like fees for your garbage or whatever. But basically everything goes in and out, gets like liquidated into their depository account with Chase, and it just like flows in and out of that account. None of it really sits there for very long, but they're still contracting with Chase for that account. And so, but Chase doesn't actually make that much in terms of interest on that. It's most of the interest that the city makes is on their investments. So then there's the services. Oakland has a very complex lockbox service. They also need to have armored cars do pickups, payroll, a lot of other things that I'm not really clear on. You'll also find that different cities have different levels of transparency about how their treasury works. And we found in Oakland that our Treasury Department does not want to tell us anything. But the city of Berkeley's treasurer's office is very open and transparent. So we're trying to learn about how treasurers work in different ways. And then also the other thing is banks, local agency deposits have to be collateralized by 110%. So if the city has a deposit in a bank, they also need to provide the collateral or like security for that at 110%. So that makes it difficult to put deposits places. So there are public banks in other countries around the world in various different models. In the United States, there's currently only 2. The Bank of North Dakota, which has been in existence since 1919, and the Territorial Bank of American Samoa, which just started operating as a member of the Federal Reserve like a few months ago, 6 months ago. And we don't actually have very much information about the Territorial Bank of American Samoa yet, just because it's hard to get information out from there. So the Bank of North Dakota is established as part of their state constitution. They partner with local banks and credit unions, and that means that they are not a retail bank. You can't like walk into the Bank of North Dakota and deposit your money. The state keeps all their money in there, and other public agencies in the state have the option of putting their money in there. And then they use their deposits to make loans in partnership with the community banks and credit unions. And they do a good job with student loans and other types of products that benefit the local community. And there's some stats about like how successful they've been. They've had 14 consecutive years of record profits, and the state's return on investment is 17%, and they have deposits totaling $4.6 billion. They are self-insured, so they are not covered by FDIC insurance like most banks, and they're a member of the Federal Reserve, which means that they can interact with the rest of the banking system. And so that's basically what we want to replicate here in California. And so the California Public Banking Alliance was created a few months ago. It's a network of a bunch of activist groups that are working on starting public banks in their cities or regions. There's one group here in the South Bay that Jake is going to talk about in a minute. I'm with the Oakland group. There's also a group in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Santa Rosa, Santa Barbara, and Eureka. And we're working on passing a law that will make it possible to get a license for a new type of bank, which would be the public bank. And they would be run by the localities, so it would be the localities would decide all the details of like what the business plan is, what the loan policy is, how it will be governed. The state will basically regulate it much like they regulate other banks. But the law that we're passing will remove some of the obstacles that might make it more complicated for governments to actually own and operate a bank, like the collateralization requirement. So this is just talking a little bit more about what we envision the banks will look like. It'll be a lot like the Bank of North Dakota, governed by independent boards, and there'll be some amount of transparency and accountability, just like other public agencies. Each bank will develop some business plan and loan policies, And we're also thinking about applying requirements from the benefit corporation law that already exists for benefit corporations, which is like they need to do an annual report about their social benefits, and they need to have the specific purpose of serving the public benefit. And the state law that we're working on is agnostic on cannabis. We get this question a lot because there's a lot of talk about public banking for cannabis. We are leaving it, we're not addressing cannabis directly in this legislation so that localities can decide to handle it if they want to, but it's not going to address it at the state level. And this is the basic timeline of what we're looking at for the state legislation. We're looking to introduce it in January, thinking that it will go into effect in January 2020, and then DBO will probably have to issue some regulations to implement it, and then maybe we can see the first bank applications go out in late 2020. And that's it.
All right. So that was great. And I want to give a quick shout out to Susan Harmon, who's in the audience. Can you wave, Susan? She's one of the founding members of the Friends of Public Bank of Oakland, so she's really a great resource right here. Our next speaker is Jake Tonkel. And can I invite you all to, if you want to just stand up while I read Jake's bio? He's got thick skin, so I think he's fine. Just a quick stretch break while I tell you about Jake. Jake is a co-chair of the Public Banking Action Team here in the South Bay. He's an active member of the South Bay Progressive Alliance and the Santa Clara County Green Party. He's a returned Peace Corps volunteer from Morocco and currently works as a biomedical engineer here in San Jose. Please help me welcome Jake Tonkel.
Thank you, Mel. Mel is my other co-chair, so let's give her a round of applause. Thank you very much. I'm gonna apologize for a minute. My job is to talk to you all about the South Bay, Silicon Valley, whatever you want to call it, and how public banking is feasible to promote some of the solutions that we think we might need here in the region, but that requires a lot of boring numbers, and so if I look down on my phone, that's what that is about, since I didn't put them up on the slides. This is Silicon Valley. You guys recognize this, it's a popular comedy show on TV. We have Facebook, Twitter, Google, the companies go on in this area, and they hold a lot of money and a lot of wealth. There's about 140 billionaires in the world that are classified as tech billionaires. 70 or so of them live in this area. So it was touched on by Gail, the wealth inequality in this region is fairly special for being one of the richest places on Earth. The other places that hold more billionaires in general are New York and Hong Kong. So it's a massive gap that we're trying to bring to our community to make this a more equitable place. The area is home to about 15 cities. You can see them mapped out here, where we have similar problems to a lot of the region and a lot of California. The part on the side over here talks about our biggest issues, according to surveys of Santa Clara County residents. Housing, jumping far away and ahead in 2016, pulling some numbers away from things like cost of living, education, total inequality, and that seems reasonable. You can't worry about social inequality with a roof not over your head. You can't worry about where your kids go to school if they don't have food first. So this really is just the statement of our inequality and the issues that we're going to face, and then focusing on how those issues come back and present themselves in our society and in our communities. So things like crime rates and the water crisis, they all fall into categories that are necessary for us to look at, to realize that when families are struggling, crime goes up. And again, inequality in the financial world is exacerbating that. The county census has about 7,000 people that are homeless. This is over, record profits in the tech world and in the Wall Street banking areas, where according to the stock market, things were going really well for the last 10 years or so. Everything was up, and we haven't really seen any change in our homelessness crisis here, despite politicians and city officials and all the great nonprofit work that people are doing. It's not a problem that we are ahead of. In total, the county estimates that there are about $520 million annually spent trying to deal with this homelessness issue. Most of them are healthcare costs. Some are about prison and dealing with crime, and then the rest are social services. It's a tough breakdown because you understand that to get in front of a homelessness crisis, you need homes, and that's an expensive upfront cost. For every unhoused person in the county, it's estimated that about $60,000 a year is spent on that human being. When they have a house, we only spend about $20,000. So unless we're paying $40,000 a year for these people to live in places, we would break even, and we certainly don't have that kind of money at the moment. So it's a struggle, again, to get out in front of a problem like this. We also are, as mentioned by Brian and a few others, this is not a unique area for climate disaster. The floods in Coyote Creek last year were estimated to cost about $1.5 billion, specifically to the city of San Jose. We also unfortunately lost 5 residents in that flood. Between that, the droughts, there are going to be massive upfront costs that we need to deal with in order to become climate resilient. The Climate Smart San Jose plan is a very ambitious deep dive into how the city of San Jose itself would need to financially build itself up to support climate resiliency efforts. And the estimated cost in total from now until 2050 is $264 billion. It's about $8 billion a year for a city whose budget is only about $1.6 billion. So multiple times the city's budget forces the city to put that cost onto residents. And you can see the estimated annual cost per person or over the private sector is taking the majority of that load. It's very possible that with some good lobbying on our part, strong activism, that we can get the tech industry to afford to make some of these changes, but our low-income neighbors are not going to be able to make a $2.5 billion investment. It's without something drastically restructuring how our incentive systems work for them to be able to afford these upgrades and these safety measures. Despite the massive upfront costs, these are also financial savings. So the same San Jose Climate Smart Plan estimates that if we don't spend any money, the city will spend $269 billion by 2050. So all of this is going to be something that we spend anyway. It's just about who bears the brunt of what happens. We can ultimately, climate resiliency is a money-saving option for us as a society. Like I mentioned in those numbers, there's $5 billion in savings if we make the right choices. If we don't, those choices get put on the backs of people that can't afford it. And like everything else, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. It's totally relevant in every way. And so when we don't deal with climate, when we don't deal with homelessness, when we don't deal with income inequality, our children, our future children are the ones that struggle. This is a photo of teachers in Evergreen Valley that are on strike. I think we're on strike. This photo was from April of last year. In total, I think from 2006 to 2011, the school districts in Santa Clara County bled about $15 million. Some of it falls into restructuring during the financial crisis, where there was no reason for Wall Street banks that hold a lot of this school district money to be friendly. They took their profits and they walked away, and we left children and teachers holding the bag. The issue that these teachers were striking about specifically, my phone locked up on me here, was that the school district couldn't give them any raises, and at the same time restructured all their benefits so that the teachers all took about a $2,700 loss, right? So as a state, there's a good friend of mine in here that's a teacher, mentioned to me yesterday, we are one of the lowest in per pupil spending on education. And when we can't spend on children and we can't spend on teachers, it's going to be very challenging for us to get out of some of the situations that we're in. Much less give those children a healthy and sustainable planet to live on in the future. This one, you got to throw it up anytime you talk about the region. We're not LA, but we're getting close. 75% of the drivers in this county are alone commuters. That's a lot of driving, and I think the result is about 1 million times around the earth every year. It's fossil fuels, it's money and gas, it's directly paying these oil companies like Chevron and Shell who make money every time you fill up. But it also has uncalculated costs. Costs when parents are stuck in a car rather than at home or volunteering or involved in government. So this type of lifestyle has certainly led to us having unaccountable politicians, unaccountable systems of governance that have been able to force profits into the pockets of the wealthiest and away from our struggling communities. Someone mentioned the number earlier. This is off of fossilfree.org, fossilfreefunds.org. $6 trillion or so divested from fossil and fuel institutions. So round of applause for everybody that's done it. Thank you. There's a lot of money out there, and our region is definitely a strong area of attack. The region as a whole, the cities in Santa Clara County, total about $25 billion in non-capital assets. How much of that goes to banks? You'll have to apologize. Our local effort doesn't have all those numbers quite yet. Like Sylvia mentioned, a lot of it is in federal bonds, and you saw the pie chart up there. But again, our federal government spends a lot of money on military, so divesting from them as well wouldn't be a bad idea at the moment. The two leaders, San Jose, having around $9 billion in cash assets, and then the county at $7 billion. Palo Alto, some of the smaller cities, all hold around $1 billion in free assets like that. So it's an enormous sum of money that would have a huge impact on businesses if we could change where it was. We can move it from banks that are investing in private prisons, in fossil fuels, in weapons manufacturing, to small businesses, to infrastructure changes so that we drive less and use less gas, more renewable energy, the list goes on. And so I'll go to that list. There are a lot of benefits to public banking, and this county will certainly benefit from all of them. Being able to provide low interest or zero interest student loans, being able to reduce the tax burdens on our low income neighbors, be able to reduce some of the issues that are causing families to move away from the area, things like the transition from a goods producing manufacturing economy to tech and service, where a lot of those service jobs are very challenging to live in an area with $1 million average home and an $800,000 or $80,000 a year median income that's set around cost of living. Can't do it on $15 an hour. Doubt you can do it on 20, but you might be able to squeak by. So between things like affordable housing, climate mitigation, and investing in our students, there's a lot of reasons why a public bank is a viable option. And really, one of the only options. Small businesses being able to have stronger access to loans when these public banks partner with credit unions, with local banks, helps us to improve the diversity of the business that we have in the region. Things like restaurants and small business shops, craftsmen, they all need loans as well. And if you're looking to be an entrepreneur, getting a loan at a low interest rate is going to be one of the #1 things that you need to succeed. As long as our city and our residents keep pumping money back into banks that pull away the profit, put it in 1 or 2 rich person's pockets or overseas, we're not going to see the community benefit of the labor, of the resources, of the knowledge, of the skills that we have as a community as a whole. And we're not going to be able to take care of the people that need it the most. Banking to insurance, we get gouged on every step of the way, and this is a way that we're trying to tackle some of those issues. What can you do to help us here? As I'm assuming most of you are residents in the county, if in Palo Alto, maybe a bit northern on the peninsula. You can check out CaliforniaPublicBankingAlliance.org or the PublicBankingInstitute.org to learn more about how a public bank might work. There's a great explanation by Sylvia, and we touched on a few more things, but everybody likes to learn, so those links are up there for you. We have a petition in the back, standing over by Bob, that you can sign if you're a resident in the county. We've already had some strong success talking to state senators and state assembly members to support the statewide bill. And we've also had some strong support from some San Jose City Council members, but we're looking to get in front of everybody and anybody that has the authority to make some of these decisions. So we can use both petitional support and knowledge support, human support. We have a meeting that's coming up on next Saturday, and I would love to see some new faces there. There's already about 25 people that attend these meetings, either in person or over the phone, and we get a lot of great work done setting up what our strategy is for dealing with county officials, how we plug into the statewide alliance, and creating resources and events like this. So if it's something you're interested in, email either, through CaliforniaPublicBankingAlliance.org, you can sign up and your email will come to me and I can reach out directly. Talk to me after this, talk to Mel. There are quite a few of us in the room, so I'm sure you'll brush shoulders with someone that's helping us out. I appreciate it, and thank you for your time. I think we will move on to the panel, so I'll send it back to Mel.
All right. You guys have been great. You've been so patient, and I think I've been too idealistic in thinking that we could get 6 people into an hour session. So we've gone over by half an hour. I think we should maybe call it quits here, or do people want to have some discussion? I don't know.
Discussion.
We need to, the library closes at 6. The bathroom closes at 5:45, by the way, if you need to make a quick run in
Yeah, we
there.
have to clean up the room too.
All right.
Can I see a show of hands? How many people want to continue and have some discussion?
Well,
Okay.
how are we gonna clean the room?
We
have
gotta
to be
clean the
out by
room
6.
by 5:45. I mean, we could have a very quick, abbreviated conversation. Why don't we all stand up and...
Finding who you want to talk to and let's mingle and help clean up.
Yeah, I think that's better now. It's gonna take at least a half hour to
Pledge
clean up.
forms from anybody.
We have a pledge card, Coat Pink pledge card. We have a South Bay Progressive Alliance petition on the side over here by Jake. We've got a petition to divest Palo Alto of fossil fuels over here at this side. I want to say that divestment and public banking are two sides of the same coin, and I hope that you've been motivated to think about how you can push this forward in your community. And yeah, we have water champions. So we have one, Brian here, who's running for water district in Belmont and San Carlos. So I say, tell your friends that live in that district, those cities. We have 2 people who would like to give announcements, and I want to say we'll clean up. And whoever's available, join us at Zareen's restaurant for maybe more conversation over there. Okay, so Samina is here, and we have one more announcement.
Hello everyone. We are having a peace picnic on September 11th at the City Hall of Palo Alto. 7 o'clock, we serve gourmet pizza, vegetables, fruit, wonderful company, spiritual program. Please join us. 250 Hamilton, and it's 7 o'clock. You would love the children. They steal the show every year. So please join us, because it is all of us together we can make a difference. Thank you.
Okay, I think there's an art show right next door at the art center, and it's fossil fuel related, so if you want to head over there, you can do that too. I guess the last announcement then is going to be call Jerry Brown on Monday. Call him and tell him to pass SB 100. Thank you so much to everyone who came and all the speakers. Thank you so much.